Wednesday here on the Locked On NFL podcast, Chris Carter, Lauren Cox talking about quarterbacks in the NFL draft. With the combine a week away, it's time to take a closer look at the guys throwing the football.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. I'm Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers. He's Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears, and we are talking all things NFL here on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast that you can find on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday content from all of our different Locked On NFL hosts all throughout the week. As a reminder, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Lauren, while the Steelers certainly could use some help at quarterback, the Bears are the team that are at the front of the conversation about what's going to happen with the quarterback market, and everyone wants to know about Caleb Williams, Justin Fields, Drake Maye, and those guys. But I want to talk about how deep of a first-round group this quarterback class might have, because that, I think, is one of the more undecided things when we look at this draft class and say, oh, there's 3 guys, oh, there's 4 guys, oh, there's 5. Some people are putting J.J. McCarthy there. If you were to pick a number for how many quarterbacks you think will actually get picked in the first round this year, where do you settle at right now?
I'm stuck between 4 and 5. Like I think there are about 4 guys that are solidly first round guys. And then, okay, you get to pick 31, 32. Does a team want to trade up to get that 5th year option on a potential quarterback that they might have otherwise just taken in the second round, but it's valuable enough to move up for to potentially get that 5th year option? But to me, I mean, obviously it's the big 3 at the top, Caleb, Drake, and Jayden Daniels. I'm not ready to put JJ McCarthy right there in that conversation, but then it's kind of a question of how the NFL feels about, McCarthy versus Penix versus Bo Nix. And I think Michael Pratt from Tulane is in this conversation. Maybe not quite as a first round guy, but he had some flashes at the Senior Bowl for sure. So to me, teams always are going to value the quarterback and going to value that option for the 5th year. So we're going to see at least a 4th one go. And I would suspect maybe a 5th one sneaks in as well.
I wouldn't be surprised because, like you said, teams want to find their quarterback of the future. And quarterback's that one position. You hit on it one time the right way, you don't have to hit on it again for another 15, 20 years. And that's where teams are trying to look at it, is trying to find those guys. And at the top of the list, Caleb Williams, Drake Maye. That's the conversation that I know everyone in Chicago is having, is like, they have Justin Fields. There's some people that want to keep Justin Fields, trade down and, get another superstar player elsewhere and build around Justin Fields, or just go and get the guy that's been like the player that everyone's been waiting to come out of college for the past couple seasons of college football in Caleb Williams. I'm with you on that. Daniels is kind of on the back end of this, but how far down do you think Daniels is compared to a Williams and a Maye? Whereas like those guys are 1A, 1B, like I think everyone's talking about them going top 5, but how much farther do you think Jayden Daniels falls down?
You see, I think every team's going to have a certain flavor of quarterback that they like here. I've certainly heard that some teams don't have Drake Maye as the number 2 quarterback on their board. I mean, there's always going to be some level of variation there, but like I think we saw last year, somebody like Anthony Richardson doesn't end up falling far all the way down to the 5th overall pick to the Colts. Like, some teams are going to look at Jayden Daniels, not that they're exactly the same as Anthony Richardson, but some teams are going to look at him and say, man, big, fast, strong quarterback with a powerful arm who can outrun anybody on the field and is not frail in that either. Like, let me invest in those tools over a quarterback like a Bo Nix or a JJ McCarthy that, maybe has had a longer track record of high level passing. And maybe you think he's, whatever you want to say, better at going through progressions or better at this or that. Like, I see Jayden Daniels go through progressions just fine. I see Jayden Daniels is not just a one-read quarterback, despite what some people try and claim he is. You can see him going through progression and making decisions with the ball. Like, to me, I would, if I'm the Patriots, I would strongly consider him at 3, and I wouldn't expect him to fall super far, past a team like the Giants at 6. I don't feel like he should go any farther than that. I still think we can't rule out that he goes number 2 to Washington, and that Drake May is the one who goes a little bit farther down. I mean, as much as Drake May does a lot of impressive things too, we are nitpicking when it comes to these quarterbacks. But however Cliff Kingsbury and Washington feels about these two guys isn't necessarily how the rest of the NFL is going to feel about these guys. All it takes is that team at 2 to say, no, we actually prefer this quarterback, and then the other one can start to fall.
Yeah, certainly. And we've seen that happen before in certain years where, like, the Niners trading up for Trey Lance and everyone's like, wait, what? And that's shaking up the whole market. Mitch Trubisky being picked where he was. There's lots of times where what we thought going into a draft night gets completely flipped and turned upside down. JJ McCarthy has seemed to be rising up people's boards. And I think it's interesting. I liked his moxie in college. I'm not sold on him as an NFL quarterback of the future. But I get some people starting to come around, watching his tape. But I don't care what anyone tells me. I liked both of these guys and how they played in college, but I am not picking Bo Nix or Michael Penix in the first round. Like, if I'm an NFL GM, Bo Nix, like the Steelers do what they're going through with Kenny Pickett. That is very much what Bo Nix represents. Like a guy who stayed in college football for a long time, had some really good numbers, in the right situation, but will be 24 in his rookie year and doesn't have an extreme build. Like he's 6'2". There's a lot of similarities there with what the Steelers are going through with Kenny Pickett. And then Michael Penix. And I loved Michael Penix when he was at Indiana. I saw him beat Penn State. I saw him do a lot of great things. He has the leadership. He has a lot of intangibles that you love, but the guy gets hurt so often. Even in that national championship game, you can see him holding his side after like every throw at some point. If those guys are around in the second and third rounds, different story to me. But that's what I actually I'm not sure if we'll get to see five quarterbacks drafted in the first round, unless you said someone gets really desperate, which happens all the time. But I'm very shaky on McCarthy, Nix, and Penix as guys that I would, if I was a GM, I would put my first round pick on right now.
I feel very similarly. Like personally, it just seems like reading between the tea leaves. I mean, everyone's saying JJ McCarthy is going to go earlier than we expect. And honestly, I think Michael Penix is a guy who, like, down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, like, looked the way he throws the ball, throws the prettiest ball. It's the kind of thing where it's like he feels like the player to me that when teams watch him throw at the combine at the pro day, they'll start to fall in love with what they see right in front of them and maybe veer a little bit away from what they saw on tape, because they see the physical tools and, man, it's just a natural thrower of the football. And even though that doesn't necessarily translate to being a great NFL quarterback, and that means you should draft him, still teams will fall in love, or coaches will fall in love with that and go, man, it just looks the way I want it to look for my quarterback. And maybe we can bump him up our board a little bit. Whereas I think somebody like Bo Nix, like you said, has sort of the resume, but when you start to dig into it a little bit, like falls down a little bit for me too, where it's like, okay, like he takes care of the ball and game manages really, really well. And that's worth something. And I mean, heck, Mac Jones was a mid first round pick, so never say never. Like that's of course easy again, where it's like you got enough of these quarterback needy teams. I think we'll get into in a minute here, that somebody's going to have to take a shot at these guys at some point. It's just a matter of whether they're confident enough to do it in round one, or if they think, okay, well, maybe we can wait until round two, and that involves them not getting a big quarterback in free agency either.
Absolutely. I want to talk about some of the other positions here in the draft. We'll get back to the quarterback talk and where we can see some of the trades happening, where people might want to be aggressive here. We'll get to all of that here on the Wednesday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. Chris Carter, Lauren Cox, stick with us. We got a lot more to discuss. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel. With so many great chances to win, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And even now, with football season being done, your season isn't done, because there's still FanDuel. And new customers at FanDuel can get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. FanDuel gives you so many ways to win, especially now at this time of the year. Every night you got NBA, NHL, college basketball, and so many more ways to win with all the action in sports going on right now. There's so many different ways to take advantage too, on top of different ways to bet. You can make quick bets, you can make live same game parlays, exclusive prop bets, and there's so many different ways to win when you sign up for FanDuel today. And again, new customers, if you join right now, you can get $150 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. To take advantage of that, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up today. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. We're back here on the Wednesday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. Chris Carter, Lauren Cox, going over NFL draft talk here. Let's talk about where we see some of these other positions that are really deep and really talented this year, because Lauren, I think there's quite a few groups that could change that. And this is where I think teams are going to have to make those tough decisions. If you take that stab at one of those later first round quarterbacks, or do you want to get in early on, the cornerback class or the offensive tackle class? If you were to pick two classes that you think are the deepest of this year, when you look at the list of prospects and you're most excited to see, who are the two position groups that you look at and you say, this is the year to get that group of guys?
I hate to take the one that it feels like we say every year, but it's true, man. Like, this wide receiver group is great. Like, and it's great at the top, and there's some real depth to it too. And you don't always get both of that. Sometimes it's like, okay, there's one great prospect and then a big gap and then a bunch of guys that are all about the same. But like this year, it's like, no, you got Marvin Harrison and Romeo Dunze and Malik Neighbors and such at the top. And then you don't have to go much farther down. You get guys like Ladd McConkey and Ricky Pearsall from Florida, Keon Coleman, some of these, Troy Franklin from Oregon. And then you keep going down a little bit farther. You got like Tez Walker and Xavier Legette and Malachi Corley and Jacob Cowing. Like, you've got guys at every spot in this draft where it's not like, okay, I got to get my wide receiver, like with the Bears at 9, right? You got to get your wide receiver at 9. Like, the best one, sure, but like if you wait and if you get a second round pick or something, there's going to be good receivers there. If you can wait to the third round, it's going to be obviously less good receivers, but like every spot in this draft, you feel like I'm pretty close to where there's going to be guys there that I can feel comfortable with. And I'll also throw a kind of a wild card out there, like not a position that's going to be a first round position, but just has some good depth there. How about safety? Feels like this thing, again, you're not no one in the top 32, maybe not even that many guys in the top 50, but like between that, like, 40 to 45 range to like even 100, like there's 4 or 5 or 6 guys in that range that you feel like, yeah, I could get a starting caliber safety day 2 of this draft at a bunch of different spots, maybe even early day 3.
Listen, I've been looking at the safety market a lot because I think the Steelers need a strong safety to pair with Minkah Fitzpatrick. And there's a lot of guys who I think really fit the bill. Tyler Nubin out of Minnesota, he's a guy that I think maybe not a first rounder, but probably somewhere in the second round. I've liked Jaden Hicks. And it's also real funny looking at big boards and stuff. Like, you look at PFF's big boards, you look at this guy's big boards here, there, everywhere. And it's so funny to see guys move up and down so drastically. Like, if you talked about Jaden Hicks out of Washington State a month ago, he looked at it as like a 4th round pick. Now he's looking like, oh no, that guy's a 2nd round pick, because people are just starting to catch up and watch their tape and be like, oh no, he is that guy. And so I think you're seeing that, like, a guy like Cameron Kinchins out of Miami, he had 5 interceptions. I think everyone was so drawn to that, but when they looked at how much he was targeted, and I covered him in the ACC, so like I know who he is, and he's a good safety, but he dropped from kind of being like the top safety to more like the 3rd round pick that you're looking at there. So I agree, like that's a good class. And even other guys, like you look at Tyke Smith, who blew it up in the Senior Bowl week. Like he had a great Senior Bowl week and everything. He shows ability to cover in the slot as well as play, ranging safety. He's looked at right now as like a 4th round pick for guys. So I like that safety pick here as far as the depth there. But the position that I think could be among the deepest is cornerback, because there are so many guys that I think could be CB1s on their team. And everyone's going to know about, Quinion Mitchell and Terrion Arnold and Cooper DeJean and those guys. But even if you go down a little bit, like Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon, I loved him. And when I saw people were like not sure where he'd be drafted, I'm like, that's a sleeper pick in my opinion. I think he's 6'3", runs well, covers well. I loved his tape. But even if you go down into like those guys that are still in the middle ranges, I like Max Melton out of Rutgers, Kalen King out of Penn State. There's guys in this draft class at corner. And it's funny, wide receiver and corner, because that was the first group that you mentioned. It seems like because of how those position groups are being trained so much going from high school to college, that every year we're finding more and more really talented groups that you could kind of pick from. And it puts less pressure on needing to sign those guys to long-term deals, unless they're the superstar that you want to build everything around in that room.
How about on the flip side, the shallow positions that stand out to me right away, like
okay,
tight end
Yeah.
It's Brock Bowers and
then a very steep drop right afterwards.
Yeah,
I do like Jadavian Sanders. I think he'd be good.
It's like Bowers, and then there's a block, and then Sanders, and then it feels like there's almost another block. It's like, okay, maybe you could fall in love with like Ben Sinnott from Kansas State or Theo Johnson from Penn State. I like as well, but like we're talking about, day 3 type tight ends here. Like it is not a group, especially compared to last year where you were drowning in tight ends.
Oh yeah,
good guys. Like I thought every team should have drafted a tight end last draft if they could, because it's never that deep, and it was a bunch of guys, and you just never know when you're going to hit a year like this. And I also feel like the running back class is pretty shallow this season. Like there's some, it's never like bleak. It's not as bad as tight end, but you don't have anybody in the first round conversation. You got a couple of second round guys maybe, but it's a lot of like day 3 guys. And it feels like you're getting closer to scraping the bottom of the barrel a little bit, especially compared to recent years where there's been such a glut of running backs, and the league doesn't value them. So really good guys have been falling to the 2nd and 3rd and 4th, 5th rounds. Like this year, there's guys you can get guys if you need one, but not like much like tight end. You're not swimming in it the way you were last season.
Yeah, I'm right with you on the running back conversation. It's not a position I have to look up too much because of the Steelers situation. They like both their top 2 guys. But as far as like, guys that wowed me in college, and I covered college football for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and like there's nobody there that I'm like, oh yeah, that guy. Like every year, like I can look at all these other positions. Like, you mentioned Brock Bowers, obviously jumps off the plate. Offensive tackle, like offensive lineman. I know about Fashanu out of Penn State, Fuaga out of Oregon State. The SEC guys like Mims and Latham, like all those guys. I'm aware of. I can't think of a running back that like I know Will Shipley because I covered him at Clemson over the years, but like there's not a guy there that stands out, and there's not a group of guys that I think kind of puts together a really strong like day 2 market for the position. Like you were saying at safety, I also think linebacker is another position that could be a good day 2 market. Maybe someone sneaks in the first round if someone gets really aggressive with that position. But like guys like Peyton Wilson, Edgerrin Cooper, Jeremiah Trotter, all those type of guys, I think there's at least like 4 or 5 linebackers that if you took on the day 2 of the draft, they could be projected to be starters in their rookie seasons and guys you could build around at that position.
Yeah, but another spot that like, there's a handful of guys, and then,
after that,
it's a little spotty. So then you got, you feel like it's another one of those spots where it's like you got to get them in that spot or else you're SOL. Like, and that's always that pressure on GMs where it's like, okay, well, I want to get a linebacker in this class, and I got to get him in the mid to late 2nd round, 3rd round, or else I can't get him at all. And then you all of a sudden get that pressure to trade up and make sure that you can go get your guy when that desperation when that the sort of supply and demand there, the lack of supply creates some of that desperation to make sure we get that guy that we need to can be the cornerstone of our defense, or any position you're trying to move up for.
Yeah, I'm right with you there. I want to talk to you though. So now that we've gone over some of the deeper classes, I think that's where always has to be looked at as far as teams that want to move up or move around for a quarterback, or do they want to go and get like, say, a JC Latham falls into like the upper teens, and you're sitting there and you're like, well, I didn't plan on taking that guy, but he's like my favorite offensive tackle in this draft class, and you got to jump over an opportunity like that. I think it's going to be interesting to weigh what teams are happy to stay there and which teams are ready to move to go get their guy at one of those positions, or also at quarterback. We'll talk about that on the other side of this break here on the Locked On NFL podcast. Chris Carter, Lauren Cox, stick with us. Still got a lot to discuss. Back here on the Locked On NFL podcast, Chris Carter, Lauren Cox, the Wednesday edition. All right, Lauren, we're gonna work our way through. Let's do the top 15 teams here that have picks in this year's draft class, and I want to go over which are the teams that you think are most likely to be aggressive and try to move up, down, whatever in this draft class.
I'm surprised you didn't want to go to 20 just for, just throwing out a random number there.
Just a random, no reason, nothing that could make me want to go to 20. No, because 20 is interesting, but I feel like 15 is like where, like that's where like the range of like the aggressive trades to get up into like the top 5, kind of stop. Top 10 could be interesting, but let's stick with 15 and we can work our way down. a little bit after that. But the Bears obviously have 2 first-round picks in the top 10, first overall from their Panthers trade, 9th overall. It was their natural pick. You have the Commanders at 2, the Patriots at 3, the Cardinals at 4, Chargers at 5, Giants at 6, Titans at 7, Falcons at 8, Jets at 10, Vikings at 11, Broncos at 12, Raiders at 13, Saints at 14, and then Colts at 15. There are some QB needy teams in that mix here. If you're looking around and, the Bears, they have the first overall pick, they can choose whether or not they want to take Caleb Williams or their quarterback of choice and then figure out what they want to do after. But if you're looking at that group afterwards, who are the teams you think could be the movers and shakers on draft day that do make trades up and down the board?
It's funny when you look at that top 15. Like, I think there are 3 teams in there that I would be shocked if they drafted a quarterback, and the other 12 you could at least have a conversation about. Not that they're all on the same footing. Like, Arizona's not taking a quarterback at 4, the Chargers aren't taking a quarterback at 5, and the Colts aren't taking one at 15. But like every other team, varying degrees, it wouldn't be shocking if the Saints took a quarterback at 14, or even the Jets with Aaron Rodgers at 10, the Titans at 7. Like, those are probably some of the less likely teams, but new regime in Tennessee, et cetera, et cetera. Like, any of those teams, you could talk yourself into being a potential quarterback team. So that's great for, I guess, the Bears at 9 are also one of those spots where they're not going to take a quarterback at 9 if they take one at 1. So that's another non-QB spot. But I've heard of the Giants are potentially a wild card to move up into the top 3 to go out and really get that guy for the franchise. But it's really like Minnesota, Denver, and Atlanta that you feel like are kind of the big ones that Bears fans have had circled for a long time. Or the Raiders will throw in there as well. Now, how many of those teams are really willing to go out? I know Denver's a little short on draft picks as is, so I don't feel like there's a ton of room for them to move up, but Atlanta is definitely the one that's got some extra juice to work with here. And you wonder if a ready-made spot for a quarterback, I mean, they might trade for Justin Fields first, but if they don't, and they don't sign anybody, that could be a great spot for a rookie quarterback.
I do think that there's some interesting spots that you can land here. The Giants are an interesting team because you signed, like, when they gave that contract to Danny Dimes, I was like, man, I don't know about that. And now here they are reaping the repercussions for that. But the Falcons, certainly with their new regime and everything that they're trying to put together, they don't have a quarterback for the future right now. Their team there, and the Jets are in such a peculiar situation because, like, you went and you got Aaron Rodgers, and then last year was over in 3 seconds. And like, you could totally go for a quarterback again, but if you do, you're kind of acknowledging, like, hey, you're not adding to this team right now with Aaron Rodgers. And if you're Robert Saleh, what's your timetable, right? Because this year didn't go well. There were lots of talk about his place and what he was doing with New York. If he drafts a quarterback, that could be a quarterback that doesn't help him this year. If Aaron Rodgers is the guy, and if they have another losing season, he might not see that guy come to fruition. I think there's some interesting things that could be at play here. I'd be interested in the Vikings at 11. I think they could be a sneaky team that could try to do something there and move up and say, hey, let's go get our quarterback of the future. But certainly the top 3 teams all could make those moves right now. Washington has no reason to be married to Sam Howell, the Patriots to Mac Jones. And of course the Bears have Justin Fields, but I think there could be some interesting things they could do with Fields.
It's interesting. The New York Giants, I think, are the only team in this range that needs a quarterback and has 2 second-round picks this year. Like, they've got some of the ammunition to move there. Whereas, and I mean, like, Washington has extra picks, and some of the other teams, like in Arizona, has extra picks, but they're not looking to move up for a quarterback there. But the Giants are the ones that have a little bit of the extra ammunition there, and they're also one of the closest teams. They'd have to give up the least compared to Atlanta and Minnesota and Las Vegas, where it's like, okay, these are multiple future first round picks plus other draft pick stuff, kind of cripple your franchise a little bit more. The Giants probably have to give up a future first and a current second or something, but like, it's a little bit easier to absorb a move from, say, 6 to 3 than from 13 to 2. I mean, we saw that last year with the Panthers, how not that Carolina is necessarily regretting their move, but like, the Chicago Bears are still reaping the rewards from that. They got an extra pick next year as well from that trade from last year. Like, it's going to hurt the Panthers for a while, and to be able to make, that big of a move up for a team drafting in the teens, like, it's where we get back in the conversation that we started with, where it's like, okay, if you're the Saints at 14, you're going to try and, salvage your future to try and move up from these guys, or just stay there and take JJ McCarthy or Bo Nix or Michael Penix. Like, they're not they're not Jayden Daniels, they're not Drake Maye, but you're weighing Bo Nix and your other draft picks versus giving up all those draft picks to go get another quarterback. And it's always a little bit of a crapshoot anyway. So is it worth taking the risk to move up for a guy when your odds aren't that much worse to just stay at 14 and take who may end up falling there?
Yeah, I think it's always a risk that every year you have to calculate if you're in the QB market, and that's the thing. Like I'm dealing with that with Pittsburgh right now. Every week it's a discussion. How aggressive should they be to fix quarterback? Should they trade up? While they still have obvious needs across the roster. That's a position that when you're in, it is a tough call every single year until you find your quarterback of the future, and then you could start to do things after that. But I also look at not just quarterback needy teams per se, but quarterback teams that if they get a quarterback, all of a sudden they are a problem because of the talent that they have around their roster. Some people put the Steelers in that conversation, with their play. I mean, they made the playoffs with Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph basically winning all their games this past season. But I look at other teams and I wonder, like, could the Broncos make a run if they actually got quarterback right and put some things together? If the Colts just had a healthy quarterback, like how good would they have been with Anthony Richardson last year? I think that there's certainly teams that are in that conversation. The Falcons are a team, they added a lot in free agency. They put weapons around the offense, but they haven't had a quarterback to conduct it. And that was another thing. Like, that was a team that when Arthur Smith was hired, he was originally banking on Matt Ryan being the guy for 3 years. Then after 1 year, he was gone. And it was like, well, guess Taylor Heineke and Desmond Ridder are the options. So, like, there are some teams out there that I think could propel themselves into serious conversations if they get the right quarterback. And I think it's always interesting to see if those teams become the most aggressive on draft day.
Yeah, I feel like you got a couple dark horses in that conversation. I mean, like, can I throw out a team like, dare I say, the Las Vegas Raiders that were, Aiden O'Connell? I mean, not that. I mean, they certainly have some holes in as far as talent goes, and we got to see how free agency, what happens with Josh Jacobs, and certainly they need to add a little more to that defense. But like, Aiden O'Connell got them to be the 13th overall. I mean, 8 and 9 last season with a 4th round rookie quarterback that no one really thought could do anything. Like, if that becomes a Drake Maye or a Jayden Daniels, I mean, the same thing with the free agent conversation. If they sign a Kirk Cousins or someone like that, like, that's a team that they're not going to win that division, right? But like, they could be in the playoff conversation, and Atlanta being in an easy division certainly makes this a different conversation. And I don't know, we haven't even mentioned, like, if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers don't get Baker Mayfield back.
That's where I was going next. Yeah.
They're in this quarterback conversation all of a sudden, but they're down at 26. It's a little bit tricky to move from that far down, but maybe just grab whoever falls all the way down to there and take that 5th-year option and roll with them.
Yeah, certainly. That's another one of those teams that, like, you had good veteran play from a guy you signed in free agency, but what do you how committed are you to that? Can you bring a person like that back? Or do you want to try and find that rookie that you built everything around? But also, they're going to be losing like Mike Evans most likely to free agency, and that also makes it harder on a rookie quarterback when you don't have one of the bigger playmaker wide receivers that made a lot of things happen for your offense over the years. But point being, there's a lot of teams that are going to be here on the table that are going to be looking to make moves, being aggressive. And with the quarterback, draft class that you're seeing here and the deep draft classes elsewhere, I think that this could be one of those strategical years where you see some GM careers get made and some GM careers come to an end because they bet too much on the wrong horse or the wrong trade to make that happen. And those can be the very things that end up being talked about for years to come because they either make or break a franchise.
Yeah, ultimately that's what makes this so much fun, and where we it's so easy to go through all the different scenarios and fall in love with, like, it's like playing franchise mode for all 32 teams at the same time. It's like, oh, what if this quarterback goes here, and if the Bears draft a quarterback, Fields goes somewhere, and if Washington drafts a quarterback, does someone trade for Sam Howell? Does someone trade for Desmond Ridder? Like, there's the sort of the secondary effects of, like, okay, the Saints draft a quarterback, is Derek Carr become available? Like, okay, there's a lot of different ways where the dominoes will not stop falling here until well after the draft is over.
Absolutely. And to keep you up to date with all those dominoes, stay tuned with the Locked On NFL podcast and all of our NFL podcasts on the Locked On Podcast Network. Lauren, thanks as always for filling in for us. We appreciate you. Shout out to James Rapine. He wasn't able to make today, but we will hopefully have him on next week. Lauren, let people can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Of course, you can hear me 5 days a week on the Locked On Bears podcast, and you can follow me on X/Twitter at Cox Sports 1.
Absolutely. He's Lauren Cox. Check him out on Locked On Bears. I'm Chris Carter. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com for all my written work there. You can also find me on the Locked On Steelers podcast every Monday through Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube, just like you can find Lauren's show, Locked On Bears, and this show, Locked On NFL. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, we got a whole nother episode with our Thursday host coming up right here on the Locked On NFL podcast.